Hi everyone, this is Jonathan. I'm the creator of Supastarter, and in this video I'm going to show you how easy it is to set up your SaaS with Supastarter. So let's do this. So before we get started, make sure that you actually have a Supabase account, because Supastarter is based on Supabase as the backend for things like database and authentication. So you're going to need a Supabase account. To do so, you can easily go into the documentation of Supastarter, and here you will find the link to the login or sign up page for Supabase. And here you can simply enter your email and password, or you can sign up with GitHub, which is probably the easier way. So I already have an account, but you can just create one and then continue to the next step. So after you've signed up to Supabase, we first of all need to create a new project. You can just give it a name. I will just call this test Supastarter project, and then we also give it a password, and that's it. Now we have to select a region where we want our backend to run. I will just select the closest location to where I live, and we start with a free plan. So I create this new project here, and this will then take a few minutes to set up. So we'll skip that part and continue when the project is ready to set up. Now the project is set up. What we need here is the API keys. So go under project settings and then API, and here you will find the URL of your Supabase instance, then a public key, which we will need, and also a secret role key, which will be needed to access the database with admin rights. Now we will skip this part for now, but just let this open in the background and continue to the actual code. So after the purchase of Supastarter, you will immediately get access to the repository, which is this one. Here you can find the complete code of the boilerplate or starter template. And what we're going to do now is to clone this repository to our local machine so that we can start working on the code. So to clone the repository, I simply copy the URL of the repository, head into my terminal, and then I run git clone, paste in the git URL, and give this folder a name of test Supastarter project. Hit enter, and this will clone the repository into my local folder. I can now head into this project and open VS Code so that we can take a look at the actual code of the boilerplate. Now here you can see the outline of the code, and we will go into this in depth later. But for now, let's just set up the environment variables so that we can actually run the project locally. Now to set up our local environment variables, we can simply open this .env.example file and rename this to .env so that it will actually be read by the Next.js application. And here you can see there are some variables that we need to define for our application to run. For now, we are going to skip the stripe variables because we're going to set that up in a separate video later on. But first of all, we are going to set up the Supabase variables here. So we head into our Supabase dashboard and just copy the variables here. This is the Supabase URL. Then we have our public Supabase key, and we also have our secret role key from Supabase that we can paste in here. Now, before we can actually run our project, we first need to install the dependencies. So we're just going to run npm install in our terminal here, and this will install all the necessary dependencies for the application, and this will take a while, so we'll skip forward to when this is done. Now all the dependencies are installed, and we should be able to run npm run dev, and this should start our local development server. Now, this will give you a local URL, so I can just open this one here. And as you can see, here is your local instance of the Supastarter app running within a few minutes. Now, there are a few more things that we need to configure before we can actually deploy our application to production. And the first thing is that we need to set up the database structure for Supabase for the example application to fully run. And to do so, you can simply open the Supabase DB setup SQL file, copy the content from here, and go into your Supabase dashboard and open the SQL editor. Then you click on New Query, paste in the code from the file, and click Run. Now this runs successfully, and now your database is ready to go for production deployment. So now before we can actually deploy our application, we need to push the code to a repository. And for this, we're going to use GitHub. So I'm going to create a new repository, call this test supastarter project. And I will just create the repository. And then I get this URL here. And what we have to do now is to replace the origin for the remote in our repository. So what we're going to do is we're going to say git remote rename, and now we rename the current origin to supastarter origin so that we can still use this later on if we want to pull new changes. This will rename that origin, and then we can just create a new one. So we say git remote add origin and paste the URL here. And now we should be able to just push to our new upstream repository. So we say git push upstream origin main. And this will now upload our code to our newly created repository, and we should be able to see the code here. Now to deploy our application, we're going to use Vercel. And so first thing you need to do is to create an account for Vercel, which you can also do for free. I already have set up my account here, so I just click on create new project. Then I will see my repository connected here, and I can import the project that I've just uploaded to my GitHub repository. And the only thing we need to do here is to enter the environment variables that we have already defined here. So we can just copy them and paste them into the fields here, and we add another one for the public key. So we can copy this one too. And lastly, we also need to copy the service rule key like this. Then we say add. And now we can click deploy. And this will take a moment. So you can see the deployment is being started. It's building the application, and we will skip this part again so to see the success in a few seconds. So now the deployment is done. This took around 1.5 minutes, and you can see your application is now deployed. So you can actually click here and see test supastarter project.vercel.app, and you have a live deployed app here. Now there's one more thing we need to do for the authentication to work correctly, which is to set up the redirect URL in your Supabase instance. So we are going to copy our project URL here, which you also have to add for your production URL later on, and go into authentication and URL configuration. And here you can see redirect URLs. So I simply say add URL, paste my URL, and then I add 2 stars at the end, which means that it's allowed for multiple subpaths, which is important so that it works with different paths for authentication pages and also multiple languages. So we click add domain, and now we're ready to go. So the authentication should work as expected. We will go into setting up the OAuth providers in a later video, but now that's actually it for this video. So you have a fully working SaaS application, including authentication, internationalization, also a block feature, which I also will cover in a separate video. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.